Thank you, Marianne, and thank you to Christopher, Mary, and the whole Founders Bay team for having us here. We are from TrustMe.AI, and we're here to sort of tell you a little bit more about sort of what we do and sort of how we see the importance of startups to secure your IP and accelerate innovation. And essentially, through security, through compliance, through governance, you can protect, secure, and monetize your IP faster. And I'm the strategy and innovation officer. I'd love to introduce Younus. He's been a former chief technology and product officer. Younus, you've worked with many successful companies. Maybe tell us about sort of what really inspired you to sort of start this company and sort of the importance of understanding sort of the security landscape.
Yeah, thanks, Larry, and thanks the Founders Bay team for collaborating with us. I've been a founder, part of the founding team a few times, all of them very successful. And I think the problems we're going to talk about, not as much about just our company, but also more about, what other founders, people are going through or some of the challenges that you might face. I came to the Valley as joining a startup that had been funded for a long time and not going anywhere. So I've been through that situation of scaling from scratch to a very, very large successful outcome. But I've seen the struggles, and I think some of the things are talking about are things that you might be facing or might become challenges for you, and that's kind of how we got into what we're doing. So definitely, I've had that first-hand experience around why governance, trust is going to be important, why you don't want to think about security and compliance being a bottleneck. And these are some very serious issues as we'll look into the deck. So why should we care as a startup or even mid-size, large-size business? Unfortunately, the challenges we're talking about does not necessarily change as company size grows. Maybe they multiply, but in the beginning, not understanding the gravity of the situation can be fatal for a founder or a startup. So I want to bring some stats that I've seen firsthand, and even in a early stage startup, most projects software when they're getting built, they'll not see the light of the day. That's three-quarters of them. I've seen that at startups. I've seen that mid-sized companies. I've seen that at Microsoft as part of Vista reset at Microsoft. Those of you remember a big Microsoft operating system failure. So trying to build IP that stretches too long, don't have an end game, can result into some serious issues. I mean, even if you're a large company, you have issues like, IP that you're building, but it becomes maybe not necessarily making the right architectural decisions in the beginning, ending up with technical debt that can become a big problem later on. And some of these issues are, when we think about it today as startup founders, oftentimes we are thinking about just our assets. And I think we'll talk a little bit about the one asset that goes unaddressed is insiders. So people who are working in your company, there could be security issues because of them. There could be financial leakages. So as a startup founder, startup team, those are some things you have to consider because this is no longer an environment where, having a distributed team and you can just ignore what might be the consequences of somebody in the team. And obviously, we're seeing the world changing where everybody is using AI. Most people are deploying it. I mean, even as early as 2 years ago, people were starting to use tools that have been helping them accelerate work, but they come with a lot of risk. So understanding their origin, understanding the supply chain, it's important because oftentimes you don't have a dedicated security team in early of the game. So, we want to think about some of these things as early as possible, but without having to create that additional spend. Why does it matter? I mean, for most startups, it's all about runway. It's all about getting that product market fit, getting to scale. But shutdowns have never been, lower, higher. You are trying to manage the last dollars. You want to figure out when you're trying to think about accelerating your innovation, securing your boundaries. You want to do it in a way where it's cost effective. You have the return on investment, and you're not investing your precious dollars on things that should be treated automatically. You want them to kind of come to fruition as much as on autopilot as possible. And as much as I mentioned before, um, when you are trying to build that MVP, or you're trying to build that next feature, you're trying to acquire customer, you're trying to get that fit, if you don't have a handle on from the beginning to the end on the security and the compliance and the financial governance, there's a very real risk that you don't deliver your milestones. And oftentimes that means not acquiring that customer. Oftentimes that means not closing that deal. And that could create a serious problem. And lastly, as I was mentioning earlier, insider threats are originated largely internally, but they are serious issues. And we will talk about that, like what you need to think about in terms of sort of preventing. But they are, pretty much most teams today are distributed. Almost all startups either have, a member here, member there. They might be remote, they might be in another country, they might be in another continent, it might be in another time zone. And, what are some of the strategies? So let's start with that, kind of thinking about the people issue, which is probably the most ignored in the whole situation, where if you think about a startup life cycle, you have a team, maybe there's a early team, and then you bring in some developers, you bring in some people, and they become the biggest risk in security. They might become the biggest risk in IP leakage. They might become the biggest risk in terms of costing you everything, right? So insider threats are a real issue that I think, as a startup founder, been there many times where I've seen these issues in Fortune 500 companies, in the companies I worked for firsthand, where we would see issues that are caused by human error. And human error could be as simple as, I've got a firewall, I've got everything in the world that can secure me, but somebody was not paying attention. They might not have had good security hygiene. They're not necessarily malicious. They were not necessarily thinking about all what could go wrong, and that could be costly. I mean, you've got very serious number of issues associated with insiders. A lot of cost for some startups. It just might mean shutdown, because if you don't have the ability to pay off that liability, that's basically could mean game over. So thinking about insiders is, I would say, is the first most often ignored issue that we see in the industry. When you think about that, extending that problem, why would that matter? Why would it be a problem in a startup environment? And you have obviously criminals hack, people who are trying to hack your systems. They're indexing machines and whatnot. And then you have actually a lot of internal actors, and a lot of times they might be disgruntled employees. They have a malicious intent, but a lot of times they just don't know. They might be inexperienced. Maybe don't have the training. They're doing 2 to 3 jobs at once. There are actually statistics people are taking on 2 or 3 full-time roles, especially common in engineers, which could be an issue. So they are maybe sharing secrets meaning private keys, things that shouldn't be on their machines. How do you deal with that? That is a serious thing to consider. You have then, as a result, the attack vectors that could result into anything like phishing, ransomware. We'll talk about that, DDoS attacks, credential stuffing. So these companies, these attackers are out there looking. The internal attack vectors might not necessarily be trying to do this on, kind of with a malicious intent. They might be doing this because they just don't know. And that could mean that you have insecure development, you have compromised resources, and that's not limited to your software. A lot of times that this could happen to your network access. So you have to think about, you might have a firewall in place. You have a service running in AWS. Is it configured properly? You have to think about if it is running and is it all the configurations have been set up to a point where it actually would limit some of those things. Is it providing elevated access to some of these people? So very comprehensive strategies needed. So starting to kind of think about that from a perspective of as a startup, do you start charging a strategy where you start solving each one of these problems? That's not even realistic. So that's really important to understand. I mean, this was a couple of years ago and it's only gotten worse. We have people a lot of times talk about AI as the trend and everybody's doing AI, but security compliance remains the biggest hot topic because, especially in the US, you have a very large gap of positions that are unfulfilled. You don't have a lot of people with cybersecurity roles. So even if you had hundreds of millions of dollars sitting in the bank and you wanted to go build a security team, I mean, it's expensive. It can cost you a lot of money. It can, even in the lowest case scenario, you are talking about a million or two. And that might not be what you're trying to do as a startup. You might be trying to build other features. You might be trying to do other things. So, keeping an eye on what this could mean to you is important. So I don't think by any means I'm recommending that when you think about security, but you think about the governance, the topic, especially we're talking about, that should become a very dedicated team, especially early on. Yeah, if you are a large mid-sized company scaling up, that becomes a necessity. Because even if you had the funds, it's not a viable strategy necessarily. So what are some of those low-hanging resolution points? And I'll be sharing some best practices as we go along. Think about, you know, training, like think about making sure it sounds old school, but ensuring that basic employees, I mean, maybe especially they're not technical people, they have the right skills to avoid phishing scams, understanding what are all those things. I'll talk a little bit more about it. Uh, have a strategy for your systems, and these systems might not necessarily just mean the where your software is running in the cloud or wherever you're deploying it, but it could be your machine that you're using to deploy the system. Oftentimes, that is an attack vector, right? So thinking about that and understanding that not necessarily having a policy around not having two-factor authentication or weak passwords that could result into issues later. Now these things might sound like simple things, but 8 out of 10 security protection issues is still a result of some of the low-hanging fruits that I'm talking about. So not ignoring the obvious is the first line of defense. And the list goes on. It could be things like Wi-Fi networks that has been set up with web key or something that was not necessarily secure, easily hackable, and then you have a machine, your personal machine running that connects to your cloud instance, and maybe it has the access privilege. So your Amazon instance where your product runs is completely secure. It's great. It's protected, but the machines, the weak points are not. And we have had instances where we had customers where they had the best security policies, they did everything right, but it turns out that some of their developers didn't necessarily were not very educated on security. They left private keys on their machines. So it's like building a fort and leaving a key outside to provide people to come in, right? Now, it doesn't necessarily just mean a breach. And I think when we talk about it, and that's why we were using the word protection, these things could result into IP leakages. I mean, now you're seeing this in especially startups that are scaling up, that you have a product that you build and you find a competitor very soon because your code is sitting out there in dark web or out somewhere because you don't have access controls for your code. So not necessarily thinking about security. I don't think it's at this point for any startup it's an optional thing. It's about doing it in a smart way. It's doing it in a way that actually results into adequate protection to not lose your intellectual property, not get become the next target of vulnerabilities. So why should we care about some of these simple things? Phishing. Let's just talk about that. I think just to give an example, and this is not necessarily just I think some people have this misconception. This is like there were some studies done, or it's an old people issue. They don't understand the scam. It's a non-tech people issue. They don't understand the scams. Um, there are phishing, obviously, when we talk about it, we talk about a traditional email fraud. But, as you guys know, I mean, if your systems are not authenticated, if you're not protected, there can be more sophisticated attack where those emails are being sent using your systems. So even for basic campaigns where phishing would result into a backdoor attack, you have a pretty successful click rate. Like, so if you're selling a product today, I mean, a 17-20% click rate is not normal. But phishing, obviously, because they use enticing messages, they would maybe have access to your email header controls, that results into something big that can happen. So a large portion of data breaches, in addition to some of the low-hanging fruits I was talking about earlier, would result from phishing. You have things like whaling, where you are being targeted as the executive of a company, you're being impersonated, things like, hey, can you sign this? Can you approve this? We have seen this in legal tech, for example, where contracts are being signed and somebody gets a trust account open, and it keeps happening because a lot of times they don't have adequate security controls, they don't have education in place. SMS obviously being a key part of the choice, as most of us would know and should know that SMS is not authenticated protocol when you're sending a text message. I mean, especially when a device from other ecosystems is involved, if it's not end-to-end encrypted, it's wide open. So not necessarily relying on names or phone numbers, having a strict communication policy, especially when it comes down to approvals or communication back, can be important. And lastly, baiting. This remains a major issue. I was talking to somebody who advises biotech companies, a limited partner, and he was target of it. And because a bank gets involved, your systems get involved. Sometimes it's just hard to avoid. So we recommend, especially for the low-hanging fruits, to think about employee training and awareness. People like us from TrustMe, others, there are several online resources can help you train on common security practices. Don't take it lightly. One breach means millions, as I was saying earlier. So think about that culture. Have the concept of, email rigor and sanitization, and not necessarily ignoring that as, oh yeah, it's fine, it's not a big deal, because that big deal can become a very large issue. There are several public companies that we've been working with, and one breach, one issue that went unnoticed or they got caught, I mean, it has long-term consequences, not just one customer, but your reputation and all that can get damaged. And then obviously the most obvious thing is having the right platforms in place which don't basically wreck your bank account, and provide you the protection that you need. There are 60 plus different analyst quadrants on security and compliance. So a lot of times it's hard. And that's kind of why we've been thinking about this problem more holistically and saying, hey, how can we actually get ahead of this? So when you take that from a insider threat perspective, I talked a little bit about people that are involved, um, talked a little bit about some of the basic issues that they can run into. Next, I'll talk about a little bit about your supply chain. So you're using third-party libraries, you're using open source things, you're using millions of development tools that are available for free. All that has consequences, right? So when you start using some of those tools, it does not come for free. It comes with a cost, and the cost is your overhead to manage that. From different articles or research that you can see, especially from IBM, the last new line of code was written in 1993. So why I'm saying that? Because when we think about building an innovative technology, we're not necessarily, inventing it from scratch. We're thinking about building it using components that already exist, maybe copying some code that we already had, or we find somewhere, or we have some AI generated libraries, we have some open source libraries, and those things are usually all are fine strategies, except that they come with risk. So you have to think about third-party and vendor risk. If you're using a library, does it have consequences? Log4j was one of the most famous library hacks that we have seen in software in the last few years, and caused pretty serious issue. That is not sort of isolated instance, right? So now, what is important here is that you want to have the visibility to manage these risks. So what I mean by that is that security shouldn't be that, hey, yeah, I can solve all these issues. So you start managing it with a shotgun approach. And what I mean by that is like if you have log4j, which is a library that people might have been using in Java, then yes, you are exposed to that risk. You had to do something about it. You had to update the library. I mean, not super difficult. But a lot of companies, startups and mid-sized companies and large companies, they didn't know that they have log4j. So they are out there stopping their critical services, patching their systems, and have no visibility. So that becomes a problem when you're thinking about security, when you're thinking about visibility, because if you don't even have the library and you're going to go patch your systems, great, that's proactive measure, but maybe it stopped your critical service. Maybe it meant disruption to your customers. Do you really want to do that? So having that visibility is critical. And lastly, think about that in the context of what it means for compliance and regulatory reason. You might have had SOC 2 or other things, what that library might do. And as you look, a lot of time that gets ignored because a lot of systems that we use today for compliance and security, a lot of their focus is just marking a checkbox. So transitioning that into, and we'll take questions towards the end, transitioning that into your assets being protected, their actions being protected, and kind of thought through, how do we take that to software and then the compliance piece. So the real world consequence today is that if you start putting all these blocks that I'm talking about, you start thinking of solutions that are sometimes siloed. You buy a security solution, then you need a person to run it. That person, if he doesn't run it or if nobody runs it, that person is often ignored. I was at RSA very recently, and amazing innovation in the space, 6,000 plus startups, but not a lot of focus on having people use that innovation. So you have tools, great platforms, but do you have the people or the roles or people that have defined accountability that can use that? So needing to think about why you might get compliance and governance, but might not be sufficient, because it then becomes a bottleneck. If the person you have the person, he's going to enforce it, you stop thinking that, hey, it's going to delay my feature ship. What do I do? Well, maybe I just ship it. And if you don't have a person and you have the tool, you are risking obviously kind of an early premature delivery. So I think having that visibility has been a huge issue. And lastly, that when you're trying to get compliance, then you go buy yet another tool. And a lot of tools out there focus especially on startup compliance, have an issue of just getting you compliance, which sounds great in paper. Yeah, let me get the compliance very quickly. But does it mean anything? Like if you look at SOC 2, they talk about, hey, you need to have security controls in place. You have to privacy control in place. If you get compliance and all you do is tell an authority that, yeah, we're doing the right thing. Yeah, it's all looking great. What does that mean? Every week we will get breach letters from our health insurance companies, legal tech. Why is that happening? Or they have all types of compliance. It's happening because it's checkbox compliance. Oftentimes you have either hired people, you've got an audit system, you said, hey, yeah, I'm great. Please give me the validation. And then you go buy the controls if you have the time and money and you want to do the right thing. And then you get the occasional audit. So when you're thinking about scaling, especially as your IP evolves, you're trying to win customers, we think that you need to think about a more integrated strategy where security is proactive. You're not buying compliance that is essentially the last thing on everybody's mind. You are buying compliance that actually provides real controls, so that you're not at risk. So not separating out SOC 2 or HIPAA or GDPR or FedRAMP from the fact that those protocols are they're giving you a mandate to deliver on protection. They're giving you a mandate on improving your security and privacy posture. And it's great that you've got some platform which says, I can fill the checklist and I said I'm going to do the right things, but if you ignore them, the consequences are real, right? You might get that deal, but when you have the next breach, you are out of luck. So having those things as you think about protection, as you think about security, is critically important. And lastly, which something that often gets missed, is because I'm talking about a lot of different things as founders, especially as you're building products, you are managing your runway. 3 months, 6 months, 2 years, whatever it is. Your burn rate, it is hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars, tens of thousands, whatever it is, right? The consequences are real. So we have always thought about it, and I personally saw that from my experience, that you gotta keep an eye on that, and getting that visibility that, okay, I've got remote teams, I've got distributed teams. Are they a security risk? Are they a IP leakages risk? Are they uh, optimized to deliver what my goals are? And are they secure? And are they going to deliver me compliant code? All those things have to sort of act together. Can you get the protection that you need? Go build a security, compliance, and trust and data team for $5 million? Yeah. I mean, can you afford it? That's a question for you. And should you be doing that? Well, should you be building your other features or business that? So having the financial governance, financial visibility is important. So summarizing that, I think, and we'll try to bring it all together. My message is that as we have looked at other startups, having been through this journey a few times at least, and successfully. I've seen a lot of pitfalls. I've seen people not necessarily having the basic security controls in place from day one, putting it to the last minute. Could be very, very late. You might already have suffered the consequences. Uh, you often look for the shortcut on compliance. And by shortcut, I mean not necessarily fast. It just means, yeah, I'm going to go fill this evidence collection thing. I'm going to make myself compliant, and I'm going to get that sticker because, um, I'm going to want to get SOC 2 because that might be the shortest time on paper, but it might become a problem later. Maybe you are going to sell your company, you get acquired by somebody, you're going to partner with somebody. So don't settle for checkbox compliance. Don't settle for systems that are necessarily just providing you a fancy Excel spreadsheet. You can do that yourself. So, think about having real security controls, think about functional check compliance. And then lastly, these 2 points go together. But as I was saying, I mean, and I've seen this so many times that I think hopefully some of the founders on the call can relate to this, that knowing your financial component and, as they affect some of these topics which could become financial liabilities, that know your financial spend for your capex and opex. And what I mean by that is that bring security, compliance, governance together, knowing that what your people are doing, especially with distributed teams. And I cannot emphasize this enough. I mean, we have government studies when people are talking about, engineers, especially because it's easier. It's nothing against engineers. It's just easier to moonlight and do multiple jobs, and so a lot of people are guilty of that. And that creates a opex capex problem, that creates a large issue for your security posture. And then also knowing what those security and compliance things will cost you. So a lot of times, because you don't have those people, when let's say you have vulnerability, you put a system in place and you don't know your spend, it means that you will end up making decision that could be wrong. And what I mean by that is that you have something to fix that's cost you $3,000 and half hour of work today, But if you don't have that cost characterization, if you don't know that it's a worth risk taking, then you might ignore it and you might not do it. So think about, you know, bringing that in early. You want to kind of address some of those issues, but have real characterizations, because lo and behold, there will be times, especially in a startup life, and I've seen this even in large companies, you have security issues, and we all see big gigabytes of patches released with critical security fixes released. Do these companies did not know that they existed when they shipped their main product? They did, right? But they couldn't hold the product. And in startup life, you will often be served with the same challenge. I have a feature that I need to ship, and I've got three security issues. So having characterization of what's its impact, what it is outcome, so that does help. So we have been focused as founders, going through this many times, a product platform that essentially puts some of these things together. And the idea is, the focus had been really mid-sized and down companies were really focused on building key capabilities, but don't want to get slowed down by trying to put this puzzle together themselves. Buy 10 solutions, then put them together, buy a solution for third party risk, buy secure your CI/CD, then buy a compliance solution, then you got a cost solution. Well, you don't have an army of people to begin with. So why not build a solution which looks at the problem from top down? It looks at what your challenges are versus giving you solution that you have to then go and orchestrate yourself. Um, all security in one place, single pane of glass. We bring quantification on issues, resolution together. We provide you productivity, cost insights across your infrastructure, people, your cloud cost, and then we provide compliance that's built with security. So we don't provide you compliance and say, hey, yeah, we've got the fastest, sure, most sexy platform, but please go buy three other things. And if you don't, yeah, we'll still give you the SOC too, but you are probably at higher risk because we didn't really bother to give you security control. So we want to bring that all together. And even if you are not using TrustMe or not working with us, this is a kind of collection of features you need to be thinking about. So that was kind of the whole outline. I hope that people found it useful. I know obviously we're in a virtual meeting, so I'll stop here, and Larry, myself, we're happy to take questions. We'll be happy to work with anybody in, collaborative capacity, whatever, in some of these topics, and extend our support to the whole community. And, again, I'm really thankful for the opportunity to sharing some of the insights around the topics, and obviously what we can do to help.
Great. Thanks, Younus. I guess a couple questions for you. Like, number one, what do you think are the most critical first steps a startup should take to secure their environment?
Yeah, thanks, Larry. I think um, start with the low-hanging fruits that I was discussing about, and we'll share some of these practices. But start with training. Start with investing in something that you will uh, build on, right? So you don't want to buy one-off solutions. I think you want to start with culture. You want to start with training. You want to not ignore that. Don't assume that everybody knows what some of those practices are, and then invest in something that you can scale with. Future-proof yourself. And that means something that is optimized for startups, mid-sized companies, and it's going to scale with you.
Second question is, what are some of the biggest blind spots in a startup's software supply chain that might go unaddressed, and how can founders evaluate these dependencies?
Yeah, so this is important because I've been through over 3 dozen transactions, buying and selling companies. And as part of startups, I had the opportunity to acquire other businesses and then also be in a conversation where we were selling our own company. And I think the biggest blind spot to me that I would advise people on, number one, not necessarily having the basic visibility on what things you're using and what are their licensing, vulnerability, business consequences, and not understanding its downstream consequence. Because why I was talking about selling and buying is because if you're using, third-party libraries and you're using things that you didn't understand licensing for or its vulnerability risk, that could become a deal blocker for you later on. When you're trying to exit the company or you're trying to scale with a large partner. So not necessarily, you know, you shouldn't have like a blind policy on just using whatever and wherever to deliver the fastest possible feature. Understand the consequences of open source, both from a licensing and risk perspective, and have that visibility early.
Right. Like last question is sort of how do you see sort of compliance and security evolving over the next few years, particularly for early stage companies?
Yeah, so I think the key point here is that, and we are not talking about AI is a thing here. Like you obviously talked about kind of, because every solution today is AI enabled. We are using agentic workflows. That's going to be a theme. I think where security and compliance has missed the mark, that 2025, 2026, every year we have had record losses. So you look at RSA and it feels like you have had a banner year in terms of protection. Well, you have 6,000 companies trying to solve this problem. So why are we not bringing the losses down on cybersecurity? It's because there is lack of unification, lack of platformization, unless you're a big player. So I do think that with the advent of more responsible use of AI, we will see more unified approaches where we look at the problem outside in versus inside out, and enable businesses to become really better enabled and equipped versus here's a thing, we can find the next new thing, but not necessarily making them secure.
Great. Well, thank you, Eunice, for your talk today, and thank you again to everyone who joined and the Founders Bay team for hosting us. So, please feel free to find us on the website or email Eunice at this address here, eunice.aftab@trustme.ai, if you have any questions.